So Lisa is straight up the aisle and sapphire.
I remember. I went with you.
We don't even go to put the thing together. I was supporting that for a long time. And the funny thing was, we just had our shingle shots. And I'm not really sure about shingle shots, but they're vicious. And we had the worst. We were down for 2 days. I couldn't look my heart. I couldn't look my heart. And I don't know. So anyway, the point being, that was my last outing. What a good turnout. Lots of good friends.
Yeah. Like you, right?
Actually saw her last night. Good job at the AWOL dinner.
Yeah, I did that. Yeah, excellent.
She was there.
Good. Oh yeah. Which I always I think that does. And I'm running pretty much too, so visibility was
Exactly.
Yes.
Expected to be hard to see. Yeah, I purposely I said I'm ready for that. Why she's ready to jump in if I need to see?
Yeah, I would like that now. It's work.
Exactly. It's amazing. So is Deb still working by the way?
She is. There's someone else in her office as well. So As am I.
You say you're going to slow down.
Slow down. Set a date.
She's got a lot of things. She's got to raise almost $1 million, but then
And all of us need help, but she's got to get some people that are going to write the $500,000 check. Yeah, really. Yeah. You have to write the $1,000 check.
it's good news. I'm not anything you run the office, the more that
Correct. And the more people they become. So
they do.
the DNR,
Raising the
agency.
that's true. Raising the so it's not parallel with how much you have to do.
Yes. Because I right now. Well, you're the
Help to a picture.
But see, they're in my attic.
How are you?
All they need is real life.
I'm not staying.
So that's
Funny, you have the subject. We have a sign. We have like 1,000 signs.
yeah, and speaking of which, I put it in very good. Okay, great. I can go to that one. Oh, I did.
Next time we're going to do
Okay, yes, thank you.
Are teachers supposed to be here?
These teachers,
They're school teachers.
I don't know.
She's here for a class.
I sent an invitation out to St. Joe's, so I graduated in 18.
It's okay. You just rushed from your daughter.
If you want to, I'm sitting in the parents' room, right here. If you want to sit here and sit with me, she
I think
might.
I'm staying. I'm like, I'm staying.
Okay, you know what? I need to be up front, but if you sit right there,
A lot about my chance. I want to say we would get on a podcast, that's a podcast from it's three Americans who made Aliyah. And the last have been almost in the pan and the Baptist. So, how are you? You're all
Thank you, by the way. One of the arguments, that was fun. But we could go to you.
last all of the parties were kind of described, and it was like, why did your phone start? Did you write this?
I love that because I one description of all the parties
Yeah.
from something else. I would like
Right. So I'll just
be century. Good.
We're back at 3. Is that when it's over?
Speak, yes.
That's what I'm going to say. I'm not going to mention that Jewish. No, I meant I thought you wanted to.
Hi, how you I'm here.
Raise your voice. Oh, it is.
Yeah, we're actually going because what she really wanted to do was to see Hamilton outside St. Louis. So we're going to see in November. He's supposed to work well. He's really here. We love him here. He's supposed I expected
Everybody's getting in their
I like
They're professionals.
I don't know. Let me see. Everybody together. Everybody together.
Okay, one more. But only if everyone stands up. You'll feel it. If you're able.
You guys, it means us too.
Yeah, we do. We feel like we don't want to be proud. And Shakeh from the African Hebrew Israelite community starting out with the heartbeat of the earth, right? So good afternoon, beloved community. We've been blessed to have Rabbis Arthur Waskow and Phyllis Berman at CRC all weekend. But this gathering, this one right here, was the first one that Rabbi Arthur talked about when we began planning this visit. Arthur said, let us bring together folks from CRC and the Jewish community beyond CRC and people from a multitude of different spiritual and philosophical traditions and wonderful activist friends on the front lines of the movements for social, racial, and environmental justice, and all of those really are connected, as we all know. A rainbow gathering at a time when we so badly need the signs of the rainbow, signs of hope. You all are our partners, allies, friends, but most of all, we are family. And I'm so glad that you are here. Thank you, Reb Arthur, from all of us and beyond, for again and again and again bringing forward the words, the actions, and the visions that inspire us all. The shofar is an Aboriginal call to gathering, a call for us to level the playing field, a call for us to honor all of the directions and to honor Mother Earth. Today, let the shofar wake up the world to the awesome challenges that we face.
Good afternoon, I'm James Croft. I represent the Ethical Society of St. Louis and the humanist community here in town. As NASA's Voyager 1 spacecraft was about to leave our solar system in 1989, scientist and humanist Carl Sagan, who was a member of the mission's imaging team, pleaded with NASA officials to turn the camera around and take one last look back at Earth before the spaceship left our solar system. And even though they were afraid the sun would fry the camera, he convinced them, and the resulting image shows the Earth from a distance of more than 4 billion miles as a tiny speck in the vastness of space, and became known as the pale blue dot. This poetic reflection is what he wrote about that image. From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest, but for us, it's different. Consider again that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you have ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every parent, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, There is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbour life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known.
Good afternoon. I'm Steve Sorkin. I'm the administrator for the St. Louis Rabbinical and Cantorial Association and also an associate with the Jewish Community Relations Council. I'm told that I've been given carte blanche to speak on behalf of the Jewish community. I don't get a chance to do that very often. So I'm speaking for all the Jews in our community today. Welcome to Central Reform Congregation. Thank you for coming today. Thank you especially to CRC for hosting Rabbi Waskow and Rabbi Berman here in St. Louis, especially on this climate strike weekend. And what a great opportunity and great timing to have you here this weekend. And thank you, Rabbi Waskow, for joining us. The Jewish Community Relations Council is thrilled that Rabbi Waskow is here in St. Louis today. For decades, literally decades, Rabbi Waskow has provided great leadership on civil rights, on peace, on the environment. Some of us remember the Freedom Seder going back to the 1960s, and Martin Luther King and Rabbi Waskow and Rabbi Berman just recently were arrested in New York. What great activism and leadership they have shown, not just in the Jewish community, but in interfaith efforts and in our society at large. Rabbi Waskow has been and continues to be an activist and a leader and an organizer. And personally, as someone who often feels like I burned out a long time ago, I can't tell you how much I admire his energy and strength and determination. JCRC is an outreach and advocacy organization, and with our 30-member congregations and organizations, we often represent the organized Jewish community on questions of public policy. We work to promote mutual understanding and harmonious relations among St. Louis's varied racial, religious, civic, and ethnic groups, and we are especially active in interfaith activities. Our work on the environment is guided by many basic Jewish commandments. Do not destroy or waste, compassion towards all living things, love and honor the trees, and of course, repair the world. And our interfaith efforts on the environment are guided by one major principle that all faiths have in common: stewardship. Earth and all of creation do not belong to us. Humans do not own the plants and the wildlife and the elements. We only have use of them while we were here. We are obligated to take care of them and pass them on in good shape and healthy condition for future generations to enjoy. Whether you worship a supreme being or a spirit or nature, or if you don't worship anything at all human beings have a basic instinct to want a better world for our children and grandchildren and future generations. Climate change is real, it is here, it is happening now, and it poses a grave threat to that instinct that we all have. It is long past time for action. I know that Rabbi Waskow will speak words of wisdom to us today, and I also know that they will not just be, let it be. Thank you, Rabbi Waskow, for being with us today.
So we planned this event for 1 o'clock. It was in one of the things I want to do is make sure that people who went to church this morning would be able to come here. My friend, Reverend Rick Edwards, is behind me. Sometimes they call me Reverend Randy and Rick, Rabbi Rick. But they tend to have so much to say and so much to sing about that 1 o'clock was pushing it for Cornerstone Baptist Church. But members of the Voices of Cornerstone are here. So I'd ask you to come up right up here in front and sing to us about total praise. Oh, yeah, you sing too?
Yes.
Shalom, assalamu alaikum, and peace to all of you. Sorry. Something that I was just struck with listening to everyone is that there's so much more that brings us together than sets us apart. Least of all, this pale blue dot that we live on, that it's our joint effort to keep it going, to sustain it, and to be stewards of the earth. My name is Amna Anwar. I am from the Islamic Foundation of Greater St. Louis. My husband and I founded the Sustainability Initiative at our mosque, and I just wanted to share a few of the things that we do there in hopes that it inspires any one of you or all of you to take whatever small effort that you think you're capable of doing to make a difference in your own communities. So a little over 2 years ago, we started the initiative, and we hold monthly educational sessions on various themes related to sustainability, from recycling to what is climate change, what's the science behind it, how do you compost, what is recyclable. A few weeks ago we talked about solar energy. We've done a few bigger projects. In Ramadan, which you may be familiar with, it's our month where we fast for 30 days. It's the most attended event at our mosque. So you see the mosque filled every day for these 30 days. We have nightly congregational prayers. My husband and I, this is what inspired us to start the initiative, is that every night we would see hundreds of plastic water bottles sitting around the prayer area, half filled, some of them, and it was just striking how much waste we were generating, and also just that people didn't know what they were doing. So we started the initiative, and the next Ramadan, we collected water bottles from the mosque for the first 3 weeks of Ramadan, and for the last few days, we displayed them in the lobby so that as people entered, and it's funny, but really it was really astonishing to see how many water bottles we had accumulated over those 3 weeks, and we hadn't even collected 100% of them. So the following year, our mosque's board on its own decided and voted to ban plastic water bottles from the mosque that Ramadan. And so this past Ramadan, earlier this summer, almost no water bottles, plastic water bottles were seen in the mosque. And if you look down our rows of prayer, you saw refillable, reusable water bottles like in front of everyone's prayer. Another big project we did this past Ramadan was we hired the services of Total Organics Recycling. They do all the compost pickup in the city and county of St. Louis. We had them come, and we had about 100 to 200 people do the break fast or iftar at the mosque every night, and we convinced the mosque to invest in compostable serviceware, which they actually found out saved them money somehow. And we were able to divert approximately 5 tons of trash from the landfill. This is just 2 people who don't have any formal training in sustainability, but we just feel passionate about our earth and the call to be stewards of the earth, and we try to educate, and we met with our board. We did whatever we could to make a difference, and these changes, by the permission and will of God, has allowed an entire community to change slowly. So I just hope that any one of you understand that you don't have to change the whole world, but you, one person, can change an entire community. And together, if we have one person in every community making these changes, we can make a huge difference together. So, thank you.
They need no introduction.
Good afternoon. That was close time. I am honored to be here today because Rabbi Waskow is here. And he has not been a part of my life, all of my life, but since we've been working on Poor People's Campaign, climate issues, he is someone that I have been able to look up to and try to model what I see in him. He is a fierce advocate for justice. he believes in shalom. And that I would follow anywhere. Recently, we worked on an aspect of doing was it a prayer vigil or a call to justice in DC with William Barber, the Poor People's Campaign. And I'm telling you, this rabbi has more energy in one finger than all of us had collectively. He is focused, he is disciplined, he knows what he's talking about, he has a strategy that brings us together and doesn't tear us apart. And so when Randy called and asked would I come today, I consider it a great honor that he is in St. Louis and a great honor to be able to be here in his presence because we have much to learn. As I was reading about him for today, and Susan will tell you the details because of her relationship with him, the one thing that struck me, many of you know, my name is Traci Blackmon and I am a minister, which is why I'm running in at the last minute today. I just left church. And what struck me is that I have learned over time that many of us become ministers when we are ordained. But there are a few people who are ordained because they are ministers. And I text Randy, like in the middle of the night almost, when I'm reading about Rabbi Waskow and find out that he became a rabbi in the 90s. But he had already done a life's work of ministry before that. I would suggest that he's always been a rabbi. Amen. And finally they got around to saying so. So that's enough because we want to hear from him. But I want St. Louis to know how incredibly blessed we are to have this man in our midst. He walks the walk, he talks the talk, and he's committed to not leaving anyone behind. And if in his 80s he's still getting arrested for justice, then none of us have any reason to complain.
Oh, that probably was the perfect introduction. But they gave us a few more minutes. Reverend Traci and I once heard Angela Davis say that relationship is the rehearsal for the revolution. Building relationships of deep listening to the experience and hopes and dreams and fears of the other, of trust and of love, prepares us to get each other's backs, to be each other's backs when anything threatens the life of my friend or of my sister. Reverend Traci and I stood together in the River Jordan, and one day we will stand in the River of Tears in Ghana. As now we stand at the confluence of the mighty Mississippi and Missouri rivers, as this climate crisis threatens not just the lives of my children or yours, but the very life and future of our grandchildren and Mother Earth, our planet. For the past few days, beginning with the climate strike on Friday, led by our youth, we have been graced by the presence of Rabbis Phyllis Berman and Arthur Waskow. They have taught us that we must build more relationships that prepare us to do the inner work that will lead us to put down our weapons of war. Greed over generosity, competition over cooperation, selfishness over sacrifice, and self-interest over the common good. They have challenged us to see that climate justice is connected to all other justice issues, tearing us apart, from separating families, tearing crying children from their parents, and keeping them, yes, in concentration camps that could turn into the death camps that we have promised would never again be part of the human story. That climate justice is linked to the environmental racism of allowing toxic lead levels in our water, food insecurity, the diseases caused by trash dumping, mold, and air and earth pollution in our poorest neighborhoods. The worldwide flooding of global scorching that is causing devastation and the flooding of our farmlands is also an issue of justice. The Torah portion this week, as we learned with these amazing rabbis, challenged us when we come into the land. It says, Ki tavo, when you come into the land, that you have to do every day, and we're always coming into the land, hayom, every day. It has to be new every day. It promises us, if we do the work, we will have eyes to see, ears to hear, and a heart to know. Each of us doing this work, willing to look beyond our own comfort zones to the reality around us. Each of us, eyes, ears, and hearts open to the suffering around us and changing the way we live and work and even love with the kind of awareness that reminds us that the Hebrew scriptures have taught us that when Abraham was willing to sacrifice his firstborn Ishmael, the son of Hagar, the Ger, the other, in the very next chapter, Abraham is sacrificing his son Isaac, which tells us that until all our children are safe, none of our children are safe. Arthur and Phyllis have been doing this holy work for lifetimes. Phyllis teaching English to immigrants and nurturing and nourishing beloved souls wherever she is. And Rabbi Arthur Waskow, PhD, rabbi, amazing human being, founded and is director of the Shalom Center, and is the author and editor of about 20 books on U.S. public policy and on religious thought and practice. He has also taken a vigorous part in public advocacy and nonviolent protest on behalf of peace, civil rights, full equality for women, LGBTQ community, and healing for the wounded earth. He has had two somewhat distinct life careers. From 1959 to 1982, he worked in Washington, D.C. on public policy concerning military strategy and disarmament, race relations, nonviolent actions, the Vietnam War, and renewable energy sources. He is a prophet way before his time. His wake-up call was with the bomb, which he warned us would devastate Mother Earth. From 1969 to the present, he has been one of the pioneers in the movement to renew the liturgical, intellectual, spiritual, and political life of the American Jewish community, and through that work, many other communities as well. As Rebbe, teacher, activist, and spiritual and moral guide, Arthur's mentoring has shaped generations of those who will not stand idly by the suffering of others, who dare to speak uncomfortable and inconvenient truths, and who know that without justice for all, there will be no peace. His life's work of teaching and stories dare us to live in the personal, to live the personal and the political in the same holy breath. When I begin to lose hope, as many others have said, as my sister Traci has said, Arthur Waskow is always there on the front line, believing that the revolution is still possible, cheering us on the front line. He encourages all of us to not give up as well. With deepest gratitude to my teacher and friend for caring about the fate of all people and of our planet, I pledge my support for the Shalom Center, and I invite all of you to do the same. We have many different organizations that are working for peace. Check out the Shalom Center. It is a heartbeat for America. If you're not familiar with Rabbi Waskow's writings, Google him. It's amazing. And they're inspiring and true, and they tell you what to do. And I invite you, my beloved St. Louis community, to enter into this wonderful work, to hear with him, and standing with my sister, Reverend Traci Blackmon, who also works every day to heal the broken heart of the world. I ask you, my beloved community, St. Louis, please welcome my friend and my brother, Rabbi Arthur Waskow.
so ago, I said to Susan, any sensible sociologist of religion would be ridiculous to imagine that of all places for this union, this synthesis of the spirit and what we call politics would happen in St. Louis. Which is to say, what are the problems with sociologies of religion as against religion, the religious impulse to recreate societies and sociology? So I want to draw on the Hebrew scriptures. Why? Because they were the spiritual experience of what we would now call an indigenous people. Shepherds and farmers, really close to the earth. The indigenous peoples of Turtle Island have, since about 1492, been trying to get us Europeans, Africans, Asians, to pay attention to their wisdom. And only recently have we barely begun to listen. Maybe the reason this is happening in St. Louis is because of, indeed, the confluence of those two great rivers, the Cahokia Mound people who infused that confluence with sacred energy and are still doing it. So we have this really unexpected treasury of the experience 3,000, 2,000 years ago of an indigenous folk whose teachings got sent out throughout the world and often forgotten by their heirs in religious life. So Rabbinic Judaism, which itself severed not only from the land of Israel, but every other land where the Jews could be thrown out at any minute, and there was no reason to make an emotional, let alone a political connection with the earth, mostly turned away from that wisdom. And Christianity, because it spread to many, many, many lands, and to try to absorb that into a sacred ecology would have been very hard, I think, also turned away. In the early revelations of the Quran, there are some extraordinary, ecstatic visions of the earth and of the universe. And I think that probably was also because of the closeness of Muhammad, peace be upon him, to the earthiness of where he lived. So we have this great treasury. And I want to suggest we look at it for two reasons, which I hope are interconnected. One is its wisdom, not totally wise. Passages in it actually revolt me, but through the thread of connection with the earth, deep wisdom. And the second reason, as I say, I hope connected, is that there are in this society the most powerful one in the world, the most earth-destructive one in the world. In this society, there are hundreds of millions of people who still, in some loose way, connect with that ancient tradition. I think of the churches, the synagogues, the mosques, the temples of American society as the sleepy, if not sleeping, giant of social change in this country. They have stopped sleeping on issues, thank God, they have stopped sleeping on issues of refugees and immigrants. And in the 60s, they stopped sleeping on issues of race. But I would certainly say this about the Jewish community, and I think it's also true about the other religious communities. Not yet has the energy of the sleepers awakened been turned to this disaster that the human race is bringing on ourselves and all the other species of the planet. So we could become the awake energy that has made a difference many times before in American history and could now make a difference in American and therefore in not only what we usually call world history, meaning human beings, but Earth history. So that's the second reason. And I hope it is because some glimmers of that wisdom still speak, but only so far in glimmers. And what I'm trying to do is to turn the glimmers into glows of energy and light. So I want to start by doing that by bringing forth 3 words of that ancient tradition. In that ancient tradition, the name that we call Earth is Adamah. And the name that we call human is Adam. Adam, Adamah. When people in English talk of the environment, it drives me crazy, because environment is out there in the environment. Adam and Adamah are like this. And the words reflect the truth. The nearest I've been able to figure out in English is to talk about earth and earthling, but earthling is still mostly a woo-woo word for Star Trek, etc. But it's a lot closer to the truth. The other word is not even a word. At the burning bush, when the voice says, go back and lead the liberation of the people, Moses says, what am I going to tell them? Who sent me? Says who, they're going to say. Who should I say? And the voice speaks several names. One of them, in Hebrew, Ehyeh, Asher, Ehyeh, I will be who I will be. I am always becoming. And it could go on. Ehyeh, Asher, Ehyeh, Asher, Ehyeh, Asher, Ehyeh. And that's the point. And then the voice says, maybe this is my nickname. In the Hebrew, it's Yud, Hey, Ho, Hey. In the Western alphabet, it's Y, H, W, H, and it never had any vowels. No matter what anybody learned in comp religion course in college, it was not Yahweh. It was not Yehovah. There were no vowels. And I found myself fairly late in my life wondering what would happen if I tried to pronounce it the way it's written. What has happened in Jewish history, beginning about 2,000 years ago with Rabbinic Judaism, was you dare not try to pronounce it. Instead say Adonai, which means Lord. And that became Kyrie, and it became Dominus, and it became Lord in English. But that's not what it was at the bush. It was not Lord. So I invite you, if you're willing to disobey 2,000 years worth of rabbis and my own grandmother, who told me when I said, but they can't be. You just taught me the letters for duh and nuh, and they aren't there in the YHWH name. She said, I know, just do it. So I finally learned to disobey that, and if you're willing, let me invite you, try pronouncing YHWH with no vowels. So what happened for me, I can even hear it, was a breath. So it's not that you're not allowed to pronounce it, there's no way to pronounce it. People don't think breathing is pronouncing anything. And it seemed to me this was a deep truth. Because it wasn't Hebrew, it was breathing. And it wasn't Egyptian, and it wasn't Greek, and it wasn't Roman, and it wasn't Chinese, and it wasn't Swahili. Or rather, it was all of them. And the second thing that came to me was, Waskow, it's not just human languages. The whole living planet breathes. And each of us is not breathing in a little private bubble. We only get to breathe in what those trees and grasses breathe out, and they only get to breathe in what we breathe out. There's a line in the Jewish prayer book that says, Nishmat kol chai tivarech es shemcha, Yah Eloheinu, that is, the breath of all life praises your name. Yud Hey Vav Hey YHWH, breath of life, our God. At that moment, I don't think our means the Jewish God. I don't think our means the human God. I think the breath of all life is breathing the name that is only a breath and saying, our Creator is that breath, the one that gives us life. So I think we're in a moment when we need to recover that. And we don't need to forget Lord, King, Melech, the Hebrew for king, all those words. But I think we need to gently put them on the back burner. In fact, there's a second time when Moses hears the voice saying, my name is... That time is in Egypt. And Moses has come back, tried to organize what a wonderful American Christian radical, A.J. Musty, called Brickmakers Union Local Number 1. He tried to organize, and Pharaoh says, nothing doing, and smashes the union. And then the voice comes to Moshe again. And he says, listen, I think you've been telling people, trying to tell them this new name, but they're not happy. They have a name. They remember a name. I remember that they remember a name. That name was El Shaddai, the God of nurture and nourishment. But that God is not sufficient. We are trying to create a new world here, and that means a new understanding of the universe and the way in which the Torah, the Bible, talks about, and we often talk about, a new understanding of the universe is a new name for God. God doesn't have names, but we have names that describe our understanding of the world. And I think this time, I know what the text says, this time, the voice says, Moshe, baby, I know that your ancestors liked this name, El Shaddai, but it is not sufficient anymore. And in fact, in Jewish tradition, the name is still around, but it's not the lead name. I think we are aware, Adonai, Lord, all those names, Dominos, Kyrie, all those names need to be not abolished, but gently smoothed over in order to hear the name that truly connects all life, the breath of all life. In Hebrew, ruach means breath, spirit, wind. In Latin, spiritus means what we call spirit, and it also means breath and wind. And there are many languages in which a single word encompasses all of that. And in our tradition, the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, in Christian tradition, the what people used to call the Holy Ghost, the Holy Geist, the Holy Spirit, part of the Christian Trinity. Time for that name to emerge much more fully. Having said that, let me turn to some other aspects of this treasury of thoughts, parables, teachings, regulations from people who live close to the earth. I want to start doing that with two parables. One, a warning of disaster. The other one, a beckoning toward a new way of being. First one is the Garden of Eden story. And I'll summarize it this way. There are many ways to understand that story. It has many faces, many dimensions. This is one that might not even have risen up, not just for me, but for other people, except the generation we live in. But this is the way I hear the story now. The voice, speaking on behalf of all reality, says to the human race, there is amazing abundance out there. Go, eat of it joyfully. A little self-restraint. Just one tree here. Don't gobble everything. And the human race has the impulse. It's a beautiful tree. It smells good. It must taste good. So we gobble everything. It's the story. And what happened? The abundance vanishes. The end of the story is, of that parable, is you will have to work every day. It goes out of its way to say every day of your life you will have to work with the sweat pouring down your face, because the earth will give forth only thorns and thistles. What's the second parable I want to share? I think it's the parable that teaches a healing from that disaster. And it's the parable that comes after a concentration of power called Pharaoh, who thought he was a god. And when Moshe said, he said exactly what Moshe expected. Says who? And I think Moshe just went. And Pharaoh said, what kind of a God is that? Come on, I'm God here. You know the end of the story. If the breath of life is not important to Pharaoh, you know where he ended up. So, the first thing that happens to the people on the other side of the Red Sea is they feel hungry. And some of them say, go back there. We had all this delicious stuff, garlics, onions, all sorts of stuff, great to eat. Here we are off going into this wilderness. What are we going to eat? And the parable says, abundance comes again. Abundance, even, you might think, richer than the Garden of Eden. The manna. And with the manna comes some self-restraint. But this time, the self-restraint is not self-denial. It's not giving up anything delicious. The self-restraint comes as the first experience of Shabbat, of the Sabbath. Joyful, wonderful, communal, delightful, full of song, and dance and love. That's really an amazing kind of self-restraint. So the second parable, I think, is a story that points toward what the people then decided to do as a continual rhythm of healing of the earth. That every seventh year, there would be a great Shabbat. They called it Shabbat Shabbaton. Shabbat to the exponential power of Shabbat. A year when the earth got to rest. And then, in a later time of social crisis, in Deuteronomy, that all happened in Leviticus, like Leviticus 25. And in Deuteronomy, it adds, at the end of that seventh year, all debts are remitted. So this is the Bible's early attempt at unifying social justice and ecological sanity. Ecological justice and social justice. And we started talking about not social justice, but eco/social justice. We live now clearly in an era when you can't have one without the other. Social injustice is what makes possible the emergence of huge corporations, ultra wealthy, the wealthiest corporations on the planet, who erect themselves into modern carbon pharaohs. That's social injustice. And we are not going to be able to cope profoundly with the injustice of the burning up of earth unless we cope with that social injustice. And at the bottom of our societies, that's at the top if you rank according to power. If you look at the most powerless, are the people who already are suffering most from the burning of carbon, of fossil fuels. The people who suffer from asthma, from totally weird cancers, because they don't have enough political power to say, you're not going to put that oil refinery in my neighborhood. You're not going to put that coal plant with its coal dust in my neighborhood. And so that injustice leads to neighborhood suffering as well as planetary suffering. So the notion of that sabbatical year, I think, needs to be a guide to us. I don't know how to shut down the whole society for a year, but as a guide, we're not an agricultural, pastoral society. What can we learn? Well, for now, it seems to me the nearest we have to a program that unifies social justice and ecological sanity is the Green New Deal. And I think we need to be working for it. At the moment, it may seem like a shrug. With this federal government, who is going to be able to accomplish this? Well, the question is, can we change that government? Did it matter that millions of people around the globe gathered this past Friday to say no more? Did it matter that they began, the initiative came from the young? And here's another quote I would like to bring you from this ancient, eco-sensitive tradition. The very last of the classical Hebrew prophets, it's not even clear whether there was a single person or it's an anthology, but for the moment, call it a person, named Malachi, my messenger, God speaking, my messenger. The last lines of the last of the ancient Hebrew prophets go, I, that is, Yeah, the breath of life will send you Elijah the prophet to turn the hearts of the elders to the youth and the hearts of the youth to the elders. Lest I come, says this 2,500-year-old teaching, lest I come and utterly destroy the earth. So I hear that, whether you might think that's a crazy thing to do or not, but the opposite of crazy, as a message from 2,500 years ago, from the last of the prophets, 2,500 years to us. In fact, earlier, Malachi has this even more amazing line. He says, a day is coming that will burn like a furnace. What? When such a day? Burn like a furnace. But he said, there's a remedy. The remedy is the wings, the rays, and the beating wings created by the rays of a sun, S-U-N, a sun of justice. Now, you may think I'm even crazier if I say, feels to me. I mean, I know my brain says, come on, but it feels to me like that is a furnace, global burning, a remedy, solar and wind power. So crazy that 2,500 years ago anybody be talking like that, but call me crazy, call Malachi crazy, okay. So now I want to come to the question, how come we have not yet been able to do what we clearly need to do? And I think there is a line in Torah that teaches why. It's not that the line has created the impulse that I'm going to describe and the line, but that the impulse created the line. I think it is an impulse within the human race, and the question is what to do with that impulse now. What is the line? Be fruitful, multiply, fill up the earth, and subdue it. That impulse seems to have been muted but there for thousands, tens of thousands of years of human history. And beginning about 250 years ago, it took over that line, that impulse, not the line, the impulse that created the line. What to do? Be fruitful, multiply, fill up the earth, and subdue it. Done! Think about it. We have done it. Amen. Almost 9 billion of us. Subduing, if by H-bombs or by burning fossil fuels, we can destroy it. We don't have to do them in order to know the earth has been subdued. Done. Now what? Now what? So I want to end with a few now whats. And I think that means a new understanding of ancient Torah, ancient Bible, ancient Quran. And it means some elements that are really new, that emerge from us, just as the ancient Torah emerged from struggling with the Egyptian and Babylonian empires, just as the Talmud and the New Testament emerged from struggling with Rome. There will be new elements as well, and we don't have to give away the old wisdom in order to discover new wisdom, partly new wisdom within them, and partly really new wisdom. So it seems to me that when the great Rabbi Akiva said about the Song of Songs, all the writings are holy. The Song of Songs is the holy of holies. which meant the inner sanctum of the Holy Temple before it had been destroyed by Kiva's time. It had been. He was saying, this is now the inner sanctum. When he said at the same meeting of the Great Sanhedrin to decide whether the Song of Songs belong in what we call the Bible or not, when he said, the Song of Songs is equal in worth to the creation of everything else. That's pretty astounding. Why the Song of Songs? I think the song is the Garden of Eden for grown-ups. For a grown-up human race. In the garden, the erotic and the spiritual are no longer separated at war with each other. They are unified. In the garden, women are not subordinated, as the end of the Eden story says they would become. But women, in fact, a woman almost certainly either wrote or edited the Song of Songs, and in the song, the woman is at least as delightfully powerful as the man. No subjugation. In the song, the name of God, even the Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the YHWH name, doesn't appear because the human beings have taken inside themselves the deep wisdom, the ethic of love. They don't need Mama, Papa to tell them what to do anymore. They have it. And what it is not subjugation. It is not gobbling up the planet. It is love. Love between human beings and love between human beings and the earth. If you read the song, you will see this is the awakened human race, able to love not only each other, but the earth as well. So that's the deepest, I think, teaching, the deepest prophetic teaching of where we need to go. And as I said, in the crisis, just like the crisis of Egypt, Babylonia, just like the crisis of Rome, in our crisis, new wisdom, new Torah, new sacred wisdom is emerging. How many people here have read this book, The Overstory by Richard Powers? Too few. Let me urge you, beg you, implore you to read this book. Phyllis and I have been reading it with each other an hour before we go to sleep each night for the last month or so. We're close to finishing, but not quite. Its preface reads like this, and you will see why I think this is wisdom emerging from our crisis. First, there was nothing. Then, there was everything. Then, in a park above a western city after dusk, the air is raining messages. A woman sits on the ground, leaning against a pine tree. Its bark presses hard against her back, as hard as life. Its needles scent the air, and a force hums in the heart of the wood. Her ears tune down to the lowest frequencies. The tree is saying things in words before words. It says, sun and water are questions endlessly worth answering. It says, a good answer must be reinvented many times from scratch. It says, every piece of earth needs a new way to grip it. There are more ways to branch than any cedar pencil will ever find. A thing can travel everywhere, just by standing still. The woman does exactly that. Signals rain down around her like seeds. Talk runs far afield tonight. The bends in the alders speak of long ago disasters. Spikes of pale chinquapin flowers shake down their pollen. Soon they will turn into shiny fruits. Poplars repeat the wind's gossip. Persimmons and walnuts set out their bribes, and rowans their blood-red clusters. Ancient oaks wave prophecies of future weather. The several hundred kinds of hawthorn laugh at the single name they're forced to share. Laurels insist that even death is nothing to lose sleep over. Something in the air's scent commands the woman, close your eyes and think of willow. The weeping you see will be wrong. Picture an acacia thorn. Nothing in your thought will be sharp enough. What hovers right above you? What floats over your head right now? Now! Trees even further away join in. All the ways you imagine us, bewitched man grows up on stilts, a nutmeg's inverted spade, gnarled Baja elephant trunks, the straight-up missile of a sow, are always amputations. Your kind never sees it whole, never sees us whole. You miss the half of it and more. There's always as much below ground as above. That's the trouble, say the trees, with people, their root problem. Life runs alongside them, unseen, right here, right next. Creating the soil, cycling water, trading in nutrients, making weather, building atmosphere, feeling and feeding and curing and sheltering more kinds of creatures than people know how to count. A chorus of living wood sings to the woman. If your mind were only a slightly greener thing, we'd drown you in meaning. And now I want to spend just a tiny bit on what do we do besides learning anew. What does it mean to say the Green New Deal? It's not only its content. How do we cope with that impulse that I mentioned? Subdue the earth. How do we cope with it now? So part of it is about the elders and the youth turning our hearts, each of our generations, to each other, as we did on Friday, and continuing it. And I think part of it is listening to some of the amazing action elements of this tradition. For example, what would it mean in the week or two before Passover and Holy Week? What would it mean to remember that Pharaoh concentrates power with such arrogance, such cruelty, such stubbornness as to bring plagues upon the earth? What would it mean to take Passover and the Last Supper, a Passover Seder, seriously in public as a time to challenge the pharaohs who do that? What would it mean to say to them, not you are demonic and must be utterly destroyed, but we remember Pharaoh's daughter, raised in the palace, raised with all the privileges of the palace, who, when she faced a real, live, moral question of a baby floating in the Nile, said, I must violate the law, my father's law, my God's law, to save this baby. In Jewish tradition, her name got changed from Bat Pharaoh, Pharaoh's daughter, to Bat Yah, God's daughter. What would it mean for us to say to Exxon, to Peabody Coal down the street? We welcome you to change. If not, we will need to disentangle, dismiss the business plan that you are pursuing that burns the earth. But we welcome you to change, to invest your knowledge, your energy, your wisdom, your money in the new forms of energy that do not destroy the planet. What would it mean for us to use the other great festivals, the festivals of light, of Hanukkah and Christmas, which this year come together? The festivals of light in a time of darkness. They were both set up that way, to light lights in a time of darkness. What would it mean to carry lights to the edges, maybe inside, the offices of senators and Congress members, saying, time for the darkness to turn to light. We have learned from the darkness. Let us turn to light. What would it mean with the Jewish festival that says it is about all the nations of the world, not just the Jews? The festival that builds these fragile huts, these sukkot. When I wrote the book, Seasons of Our Joy, my publisher said, well, there's got to be a glossary of Hebrew and Yiddish words. So I wrote one, and it said, sukkah, hut with a leafy roof. And when it came back from the printer, it said, sukkah, hut with a leaky roof. I said, hey, that's God's typographical correction. I'm not fooling around with it. They're both true. Leafy and leaky, vulnerable, open to the earth. Well, and one of the great rituals of that festival is taking 3 branches and a fruit and bringing them together and waving them in the 7 directions of the world. If you think there are only 6, like north, south, east, west, up, down. The tradition says each waving, you take it out there and you bring it to your heart. The 7th direction of the world is inner, inward, inward, inward. What would it mean to wave them in front of a congressional office or in front of banks that invest in burning the earth? And to say, stop, join the festival of harvest, the festival of earth, the festival of all the nations to celebrate abundance. So those are just hints and directions of how we take the religious traditions seriously, that we do not need as religious folk to simply copy the forms which are valuable, but not simply to copy them from secular activists. Thank God, I would say, for secular activists. And thank God for the teachings that could enrich activism with religious symbolism, religious depth, religious openness to earth. And that's really where I want to pause. Thank you. Folks, I got assigned the task of facilitating discussion. And the first thing I would like to do, we don't have much time because Phyllis and I have to get back to Philadelphia, and there's an airplane that already makes me tremble. An airplane.
We'll get you there.
Yeah, but it's not the time that makes me tremble, it's the gasoline that makes me tremble. So I'd like to invite us to begin in a maybe not conventional way. For 7 minutes, I suggest that each of us turn to somebody who's sitting next to us. And for 3.5 minutes apiece, talk about whatever has arisen for you out of this whole array of conversation with different religious traditions, people from different pieces of the human community, different aspects of the human community. Someday when I have time, I'll tell you a story about an 8-year-old grandchild and her image of God's image and how different aspects of the Jewish community, of the human community, combine, fit together to make. She said, in one line, she said, oh, we're all different, like the different pieces of my jigsaw puzzle. You gotta fit us together, and then we can be in God's image. 8 years old. For an instant, I thought, Waskow, you can get out of the midrash business. Yeah, right. All right, so start now, please. Turn to somebody near you, and for 3.5 minutes apiece. think it's no accident that shalom begins with. All right, so say thanks with or without words to your partner. And then, I understand there's some wireless mics. We have some time left for whatever you want to share with the whole community that's come out of your thoughts and out of your last 7 minutes of conversation. So where are those? There they are. Okay.
Okay, this is my first question is, what next?
Amen. Amen. What next? Well, I hinted, I think we need new wisdom to be treated as sacred wisdom, A. B, I think we need new acts. And I think we can learn from the best. I mean, for instance, the best activism in America of the last half century, a little more than half century, did come from a religious folk. It came from the black churches in the South. And one of its crucial acts was, and this was even from college students, not from church folk, was the sit-in. What were the sit-ins? The sit-ins meant, listen, we want restaurants and drugstores and such to be racially integrated. We're not going to go to Congress and ask for a law. And we're not going to blow up restaurants that are not integrated. What we're going to do is integrate them. Then you're going to have to figure out what to do with us. You can throw us in jail. You can, kill us. Or you can integrate the restaurants. And the wave of change that brought, in which what happened was embodying the future in the present. So one thing that occurs to me is what would happen if synagogues, churches, mosques, temples, everywhere in America, everywhere else for that matter, decided to become the sparks of neighborhood solarization co-ops. Not just individuals solarizing their own homes, but co-ops. Why co-ops? Because the co-op can be a community. What I said about the self-restraint of the mana and Shabbat meant that you didn't have to be, I had to give up my delightful automobile. Instead, you created community. And what would it mean for religious communities to do that? What would it mean? Many of our churches, synagogues, and mosques have Alcoholics Anonymous. What would it mean to have oilaholics not so anonymous? We're all caught in the system. When I said about the airplane and its burning oil, we're caught in the system. There were addicts, nicotine addicts, who were caught in the system, and if they finally figured out to take on the drug lords of nicotine, heads of the cigarette companies, and at least partly restrain that addiction. Well, what if oilaholics said, okay, so far I'm caught, but I'm going to work to make a system in which I don't have to be caught anymore. I don't like being an addict to oil, and I know there are drug lords, and they are sponsoring my addiction. What would it mean to change? So those are thoughts, models for what it could mean. I love the idea of people waving the 4 species, the fruits and the branches. When I did this, I didn't grow up doing this, all this. When I was 40 for the first time, I did that waving. And then I gave it to my 10-year-old son, and I said, no, you do it. So I figured that for thousands of years, Jewish fathers and sons, maybe daughters and mothers as well, but for sure, fathers and sons passed on how to, do the waving. So he did it. Then I said a question that they haven't asked for thousands of years. I said, what did it feel like? And he said, I felt like I was a tree. I was a tree. It was my branches waving in the wind. It was my own fruit I could smell. I was a tree. Maybe that's one of the reasons he's now spent the last 15 years working on climate policy in Washington, D.C. Maybe that moment. So, what would it mean to do that in front of a congressional office or inside? What would it mean to do it in front of Wells Fargo, the second largest investor in burning the earth and the one with the most local branches around the country? What would it mean to do it there and say, we know how you could change. Change! We are here to insist that you change. That's what I would say is what next. Yeah.
What this brings up for me whenever there's this kind of event is the fact that we don't know if we're going to be successful. And so what I think of is Tim Wise talking about trying to dismantle racism. We don't know if we're going to be successful in that respect or mitigating the worst of climate change. But it is the work in front of us that must be done. And in so doing, we add meaning and purpose to our own lives, but we also connect with other people for whom there is shared meaning, and that is all there is to do if we go forward to what is in front of us.
Amen. That's the Hebrew version of amen. Amen. And the Arabic version of amin. All the same word, right? Only different. I love it. Other? So there's a line in the tradition. Phyllis, is it a psalm? It says, God speaking, God, the breath of life speaking, for me, silence is praise. So that's okay. Breathe. And where we breathe, it sounds sort of almost like silence. So I think for the Holy One, who is the breath of life, what sounds like silence, which is simply breathing, that is already praise. I think we might end there. Let me invite us all to breathe with each other, to be... Oh, okay, sure.
We had a beautiful image of collecting water bottles at the mosque. One of my horrible feelings of being trapped and anger arises whenever I go to the grocery store or the drugstore, because the packaging industry has trapped us all. And it's wasteful and it's fraudulent. If you look at the packages, they're huge, and what's inside is 6 little pills. And not only that, they're very hard to open, and particularly for older people, you know, these child-proof packages are also adult-proof, and especially if you got a little arthritis or something. So what I want to know is, does anybody have any bright ideas about how we could join together to get the packaging industry off our backs and quit putting all this junk out that we can do nothing but most of them can't even be recycled. So I would love to know how we can all take that water bottle and make it much more universal. So that when we go to the grocery store, in the drugstore, I don't have to buy a box this high with 2 holes in it and one little thing with a, you know.
On Friday noon, there was at least one alderman of the city of St. Louis who was at that strike demonstration. And the city of St. Louis could do a lot to end that kind of packaging. Some other cities have taken some steps. So that the conversation is for bringing the disempowered into their legitimate power to change the way that government acts. And that means breathing together with words. So that's what I welcome to you all, us all to do, is breathe together, knowing that we are breathing God's name. We are breathing the divine energy that keeps life alive on this planet, and we shape our words in order to make that possible. Amen. 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 Amen.
You can stay standing. How about that? And just keep breathing. So we want to close together. There's a song that we're going to attempt to lead, but we need everyone's help. We have rabbinical student co-op Baruch Frazier, song leader and drummer extraordinaire, is going to lead the way. But hey, more drums the better. So if you guys want to. This song, most of us know is He's Got the Whole World in His Hands. We're going to change that a little bit. We've got the whole world in our hands. First verse. The second verse is usually you and me, brother, you and me, sister. We're going non-binary here. We got you and me.
Inclusive, that's what we're going.
Say it again?
We're going inclusive.
We're going inclusive. We got you and me, family, in our hands. Second verse. And the third verse, repeat. We've got the whole world in our hands. So, take a deep breath. With such gratitude for Rabbi Arthur Waskow, for everybody who spoke and sang and participated, for all of you for coming out here, meet somebody you've never met before. So many communities are represented here this afternoon. It's such an opportunity, as we've learned, to interbreathe.
Can we hold hands?
We should hold hands. Good idea.
Or you can leave your hands free to clap and your feet ready to dance.
So you know, we're a Reformed Jewish congregation. We leave it up to you. All right, you're gonna start, right, KB? Uno, dos, tres, echad, stein, shalosh. 1, 2, 3.